Hi, and welcome to the Stephan Livera podcast focused on Bitcoin and Austrian economics. Today we are carrying on with the Hardware Wallet interview series, but first, let me introduce the sponsors of the podcast. Check out Kraken, one of the world's leading Bitcoin exchanges. I'm really impressed with the way they operate. They are known for having a really strong focus on security with Kraken Security Labs. They also act ethically in the space, supporting organizations such as Coin Center. They're one of the longest standing Bitcoin exchanges and they're consistently rated the best. They've got a high quality platform offering the best liquidity in the industry. They've got high trading volume and low fees with no minimum or hidden fees. Kraken have 24/7 support, and on the institutional and business solution side, they are providing the best-in-class accounting, reconciliation, and reporting services for cryptocurrency hedge funds, asset managers, and fund administrators. Kraken have an OTC desk for those higher-touch, large block trades. They offer 5 fiat currencies and also offer margin and futures trading. To learn more and sign up, go to the Kraken link in the show notes. Next up, Unchained Capital. These guys are doing Bitcoin financial services, and they've got 2 main products. One is the Vault, and the other is the Bitcoin collateralized loan. So the Vault is a 2 of 3 keys multi-signature vault. So you can use Trezor or Ledger. It's really easy to set up. It's all guided through a web interface, and you can distribute your keys. And on the Bitcoin collateralized loan side, you can get USD liquidity without selling Bitcoins, meaning you don't trigger a capital gains event. So while that loan is outstanding, it's stored in a dedicated multi-signature address under what's called collaborative custody. So if you want to learn more about that, go to the Unchained Capital link in the show notes. So with that said, we are carrying on with the Hardware Wallet interview series today with Charles Guillemet, Chief Security Officer of Ledger, and he's also leading the Ledger Donjon team, which is a hardware security and ethical hacking team. So he has a very impressive background working in hardware security, so there's a lot we can learn from this interview. We talk about what goes into hardware wallet security, what are the crucial components that must be done well. We talk about example hardware wallet attacks and how these are done and how they can be protected against. And also, just in case you're having trouble following along because it's technical material, just a reminder that I've also got episode transcripts on my website, stephanlivera.com, on each episode page. So you can feel free to read along while you listen, or even use the transcript as a resource for later on. Here's the interview. Charles, welcome to the show.
Hi, Stephan. Thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be part of the show. I heard the first few episodes about hardware wallets. That was very interesting, many contrasted opinions. And I'm gonna try to share my views on this topic that I know quite well now.
Yeah, I'm sure you do have a lot to share. So let's get a little bit of background on you and how did you get into this world?
Yeah, sure. About me, well, first of all, sorry for my strong accent. I'm French. During my education in France, I studied pure mathematics, computer science, and cryptography. This is basically my technical background. I've been working in the security and hardware security specifically industry from the beginning of my career, a bit more than 10 years ago. At first, I worked in a small company in France, which is called Tempo. This company designed secure element. I started there as an intern, and during my internship, I bracked the security of one of their circuits using side channel attacks. So they decided to keep me for a few years, and I was in charge of the security of circuits. After that, I joined the French ITSF. An ITSF is an Information Technology Security Evaluation Facility. Basically, this is a third-party security evaluation lab, which is officially accredited by the ANSSI in France. ANSSI is the French security certification body. And to give an example with secure elements, the circuits are designed for critical applications such as banking and passports. But before putting these smart cards on the market, the vendors have to go through an evaluation and certification process. It lasts several months, and at the end of the evaluation, when all the vulnerabilities which have been found by the ITSF have been fixed or solved and so on, the certification authority emits a security certificate, and this certificate grants the vendor to sell the secure element for critical application. What makes a a secure element. This is the security certification, basically. I worked there for around 4 years, and I was leading the lab. And I joined Ledger almost 2 years ago as a CSO. Basically, I'm responsible for security of Ledger's product, and as you can imagine, this is a huge mission. I created the Donjon. The Donjon is our internal security evaluation lab. We are 8 security experts coming from the security industry, and day to day we try to break our products because I think this is the only way to improve the security of our products. And when we found vulnerabilities or possible enhancement, we work tightly with the design team to improve our product. Our field of expertise are quite wide. We have experts in hardware security, software security, and cryptography.
Fantastic. And as I understand, Donjon Ledger doesn't just hack Ledger products, it actually hacks even other hardware wallets as well. And there's a bit of a process around working with that other hardware wallet vendor around working with them on if they need to patch that vulnerability.
Yes, you're correct. During the past years, we spent most of our time studying our products. This is maybe 95% of our time, but we also spend some time to evaluate the security of our vendors' product because we use HSM, for instance. We use secure elements, we use different circuits. So we also evaluate this product because as we construct a security product not from scratch, but with basic blocks, we have to evaluate them. This is also part of our time. And also we spend some time to look at the security of the hardware wallet on the ecosystem, but not only a hardware wallet, basically a security product.
Fascinating. And so can you give us a little bit of a background then? What are some of the basics of Bitcoin hardware wallet security? What does good look like?
Well, basically, hardware wallet is a physical device to store your cryptocurrency keys and to perform transaction securely. The basic threat model for a hardware wallet can be simplified into 3 main security features. The first one for me is the capability to generate high quality randomness. This is very important, at least for generating your seed. If ever the wallet has a bad quality random, it can have terrible consequences. This is very simple, but it is very, very important. The second main security features for me is probably the ability to prove genuineness of the device from the hardware point of view and also from the firmware point of view. The hardware wallet must have a secure mechanism for this, and this is at the utmost importance. The wallet should ensure secure display and secure inputs for verifying and granting transaction. And these properties can only be granted if the wallet has a genuineness and integrity mechanism. Otherwise, you will be vulnerable to supply chain attacks, evil-made attacks, and if an attacker controls the code running on your hardware wallet, he basically controls your coin. So this is also a major security features. And the third main security features is also very basic. This is the confidentiality of your keys and the seed. The key are generated and stored in the device, and they must remain protected against remote attacks, but also against physical attacks. That means that the hardware wallet must protect your keys, even if your computer is compromised, or even if the attacker just stole your device. For me, the threat model of a hardware wallet is very simple, but not very easy to ensure.
Thanks for the breakdown there. So maybe if we were to break some of those 3 components down, what does it take to, as you said, generate high quality entropy and randomness?
hardware wallets are made with IC, with integrated circuit, and inside the circuit there is often TRNG, which stands for True Random Number Generator, and this is a specific part of electronics. There are different kind of design. Often this is three oscillators, and which runs in parallel, and they are sampled at a very specific timing. And this very tiny source of entropy is amplified with different means, but this is often the kind of design, and you can find this kind of circuit in secure element, but also in general purpose MCU. In the case of secure element, there is a security evaluation which verifies the good quality of the randomness, and also there is a mathematical proof which is required for security certification of the randomness.
How about now the second part where you were talking about proving the genuineness of the device? So as you were saying, there's supply chain attacks. Someone may have tampered with your device before it got to you, or the evil maid attack where, let's say, you're staying in a hotel and the maid takes your device and tampers with it or does something with it. How can a device be protected against that?
You can imagine several kind of mechanism, but basically what we would want is a device which prevents an attacker to read the memory and write the memory. And if you have this basic property, you can put a key, a secret key inside the circuit, and you will request the circuit to prove that it actually holds this key. And if the circuit cannot be tampered with and rewritten, the genuineness can be achieved using this kind of mechanism.
Excellent. And then I think this is probably one that everyone wants to know is how difficult is it, and what does it take to keep the confidentiality of your seed and your keys?
So in this case, it really depends on your threat model, what you consider, and what you don't consider. But in my threat model, I consider remote attacks and physical attacks. For remote attacks, you have to take care of all your inputs and to be sure they are properly taken into account. There is no buffer overflow, no stack overflow, no how to say it? You have to take care of all the software attacks basically. And if you also consider the physical attacks threat model, you have to consider the hardware attacks like side channel attacks, fault attacks, and basic hardware attacks basically.
Also, this is another common point for discussion within hardware wallets world is open source versus closed source models on software and also the hardware. Can you tell us a little bit about how do you think about that?
This question is very interesting, and I think this is quite fundamental. First of all, I'd like to say that I love the open source approach. I've been working in the security industry for more than 10 years, and the usual approach in this industry is to keep everything secret, especially in the hardware security industry. The main reason why they keep everything secret is they want to keep their technology advantage. One of the things which motivated me to join Ledger is the openness of the platform. Yes, we all would like to have all the code to be open source, but already the NanoS and the NanoX now are the only platform running on a secure element where you can load your own native code. From the hardware security industry perspective, it's already a huge gap. Creating the Donjon, we also decided to open source our attack tools, which is also clearly disruptive from the hardware security perspective. But my mission is about security, so let's discuss this question from a security perspective. What we wait from a hardware wallet is clearly security. First, open source allows auditability of your device, but it does not guarantee that relevant people will audit your device. In the case of the Nano, the circuit and the devices have been evaluated by us, but also by several relevant security evaluation labs. Second, if you decide to make your own open source hardware wallet, you'll have no choice but using a general purpose MCU. And from my experience, I can say something. The data from a general purpose MCU can be extracted very easily. So it removes two main security features in the threat model: the possibility to verify the genuineness of the device, and also the confidentiality of your secret key against an attacker with a physical access. Finally, I'd like to go a bit more into the details of open source hardware wallets, what is actually open source and what is not, because we often think that everything is open source on open source hardware wallet, and it's not clearly the case. So if we look a hardware wallet schematically, let's consider its a chip with its firmware. We have several layers. The lowest level will be the chip design. Then we'll have the chip implementation and manufacturing. And if we go to the software part, we'll have the low-level software, which is designed by the IC vendor. There is often a bootloader, some boot primitives, drivers, this kind of code. And if we stop here, the three layers are closed source and kept secret by the IC vendors. This is the case for the secure element, but this is also the case for general purpose MCU. In the case of the IC vendors, in the case of the secure element, these parts are designed for security and audited. But in the case of general purpose MCU, they are not audited by anyone, basically. If we go a bit higher in the layers, we get the datasheet of the IC. Here is the main difference. The secure element datasheet is accessible only under NDA, maybe because it explains all the proprietary countermeasure of the IC, how to configure them, and so on. And in the case of general purpose MCU, they are public, but there are no countermeasure basically in the general purpose MCU. Then we arrive to the actual firmware. Open source hardware wallets have mostly a monolithic open source firmware, and only one can audit it. But on the other side, the firmwares of the NanoS and NanoX are divided in two parts. You have the operating system in one side, which is closed source, because it uses the proprietary countermeasure of the IC. But this firmware is constantly audited by the Donjon, and it has also been audited and certified by a third-party laboratory. On the other side, the application running on top of this operating system, like Bitcoin application, Ethereum, our password manager, or SSH application, are open source. So sorry for the long explanation. I just wanted to outline that, in fact, an open source hardware wallet, there is a small part of the critical layers which are actually open source. Also, our goal is to open source the most part of our operating system. So probably in the next months, we'll open source most of our operating system, keeping closed source only the low-level part of the OS, which use the proprietary part of the circuit. So I think people defending open source in this particular case are a bit religious. Finally, what we would like is an open source secure element. It will solve all the questions, but this is a complete other story.
Right. So if I were to summarize that, then there are different layers of this stack, if you will. So you've got the firmware, you mentioned the datasheet, and the IC, which is at a low level. And as I understand you, then there are certain components of that IC that are under NDA, non-disclosure agreement, with the creator of that product. And the reason being there are certain proprietary countermeasures that they have put in place with that IC. And then the reason, if you go back up that stack to the OS, the operating system level, there are certain components of that OS that are closed source because they interact back down with that proprietary countermeasure part within the IC. Would that be a correct summary then?
This is exactly why our operating system is closed source. For this only reason, the NDA only concerns their very proprietary countermeasure, which are implemented into the secure element.
Got it. Okay. I'd be really interested to just talk a little bit about some of the pitfalls and some of the past problems and ways that Bitcoin hardware wallets have been hacked. Could you give us just an overview on what are some of the ways that people try to find vulnerabilities? So as you mentioned, there's side channel attacks. There might be a problem with the cryptography. It might be insufficient entropy or randomness. Can you outline some of those for us?
This is the main way to attack hardware wallet, basically. And when I joined Ledger, I've been explained that I didn't know very well this ecosystem, and I've been explained that some competitors used general purpose MCU for storing their seed. And for me, that was I was coming from the secure element industry, and for me that was a complete nonsense. I was clearly aware that this kind of MCU were clearly vulnerable to many different attacks. Then I created the Donjon, our security evaluation lab. And during our creation, we built some tools and we implemented the attack test bench and so on. And we spent most of our time to evaluate our product, but we also spent some time to evaluate others. So we had a look to the other wallets on the market, mostly by scientific interest first. But when we found all those vulnerabilities, we felt responsible to help the other vendors.
Got it. It might be good to break down some of those ideas. I think one of them, and it comes to this asymmetry, the idea of the cost to attack versus the cost of defense. And as I understand, you have to try to make it so that the cost to defend is cheaper than the cost to attack. How does that play into what you do with Ledger and the devices?
Yeah, the attack and defense is a cat and mouse game, basically. The thing is that if you don't invest in the defense, the attacker wins at the end at some point. And this is precisely why the Bitcoin community, have to continue to invest our time and resources to improve the security in the ecosystem. And I'm pretty confident that we'll enable to prevent all those acts. But again, the cost of the defense is not null. We have to spend a lot of time and a lot of money to improve the bar for security in this industry. And the cost of the attack, it really depends what you are attacking. If the stakes are high, the attacker will spend a lot of money to break systems, and they will succeed. Basically, this is if you win more money breaking a system that it costs you to break it, attackers will do it.
Right. Yeah. So let's try and break down some of the typical ways that you might analyze these. So as you mentioned, there's side channel attacks. So as I understand, there are different types of those side channels that you may look at. So there's, as I understand, there's power, looking at the variation or the emanation in that power. There's EM radiation, visual, acoustic. Can you help explain what are some of those and how does it work?
Side channel attacks. So we love this kind of attacks in the Donjon, and we have a side channel attack test bench, and the idea of side channel attacks is to monitor a physical measurement of the circuit during its when it runs some code. You can monitor the power consumption, you can monitor the electromagnetic emanation, you can monitor the sound, you can monitor a lot of things. What is the most efficient is often electromagnetic emanation or power consumption. So what you will do as an attacker is you will use the hardware wallet, for instance, and during its computation, you will record the power consumption. You will get a lot of traces, and you will try to find a correlation between this set of traces and the data which is handled inside the hardware wallet. And if there is such a correlation, there are plenty of techniques which allows the attacker to retrieve this data. And if this data is a secret key, then you succeed to mount an attack. We spent some time on the Tweezer one implementation of pin verification, and what we prove is, as an attacker, if I steal your device, I will try a few pin values and record the power consumption of the device during the pin comparison. And only a few power consumption traces are enough to guess the correct value of the pin. And then thus I will be able to access to your funds. We did a responsible disclosure on this one with Tweezer, and they patched it after a few months. And I think the new implementation is clearly harder to break regarding side channel attacks.
Yeah. And so in that example with the pin, as I understand, there are different countermeasures that a manufacturer may put into place. So one example is, I've heard of exponential decay, right? So every time you try the pin and you fail, it makes it even longer before you can try it again. What are your thoughts on that versus, let's say, having just a hard limit? This is the maximum number of times you may try to brute force the pin, otherwise it bricks the device.
Yeah, for instance, in the case of Tweezer, we have 15 tries, I think, or 16, 15 or 16. And this is already a lot from a side channel perspective, because you can record the 15 traces and then try with those traces, compute the correlation, try to retrieve the correct value of the pin, and then use it on your 16th try. So 15 is already a lot, but there are other countermeasures. The idea is to ensure that the power consumption of the device does not depend only on the correct value of the pin, but on other random things. For instance, this is one kind of countermeasure that you can put in place. And in secure element, there are built-in countermeasure against side channel attacks, which put a lot of noise on the power consumption. This kind of or timing desynchronization. This kind of countermeasure.
So I understand there's this concept of profiling, right? So you might, for example, let's say you know a certain device is a commonly used hardware wallet, and you may buy a copy of that hardware wallet. It's openly available, right? And you may then use that to try to understand from that oscillogram, okay, what value is it computing at the time that it's this level, and is that then you're using that profile to then, when you're doing if you're trying to do an attack, obviously, you're then comparing it back against the profile that you created earlier. Is that roughly how one way you do it?
Oh, you're completely correct. And in this very case, this is exactly what we did. We have Tweezer one for which we will try a lot of different pin, and we'll record a lot of traces, and we will do a profiling as you just explained. Exactly as in computer vision, we will train an AI to recognize not dogs from a cat on a picture, but digit equals 1 or equal 9 on the power traces. But this is basically exactly the same thing. We will train a machine learning algorithm to recognize your digits on the power consumption. So we do that on the device A, for which we know the correct value of the pin. And on the device that we will steal from the victim, we will just record a few traces, and we will ask to our machine learning algorithm what's the correct value of the pin. And the machine learning algorithm will answer us the most likely value for these traces, for this one. And when you combine the traces, you are able to guess the correct value of the pin. On this very example, we were able to guess the correct value of the pin within 4 traces. So you do 4 wrong value of the pin, and the 5th is the correct one.
Right. Yeah, that's really fascinating. And another concept I saw just from doing some reading is this concept of DPA. Is it differential power analysis? Is it? Is that so? What's a DPA? What is a DPA attack?
Oh, you studied the topic. Yeah, DPA attack is the first one, which has been discovered maybe in 1998, and in this case, this is non-profiled side channel attacks. That means that you don't do the first step, which consists in understanding how the device is running. But to summarize, this is a statistical process which allows an attacker to distinguish what would be the value of a specific bit of the key.
I see, yeah. And from a cryptographic point of view, is there anything there that changes in terms of which cryptocurrency is being hacked, or is it more ultimately about trying to get at what is the underlying seed within that device?
This is just a good question because on hardware wallet there is the very moment when you are computing either your public key or you're computing a transaction, and at this very moment you will use your secret key. And if you are able to measure the power consumption of the device at this very moment, it can give you a lot of information about the key. And this algorithm will depend on the cryptocurrency. For instance, if you're using Monero, your scalar multiplication will be implemented using ED 25519. If you're using Bitcoin, you will use SECP 256 curves. And in both cases, that won't be the same algorithm. And there are some caveats in the implementation which will change the properties of the power consumption, and that will ease the attacker to extract the key. But in the threat model of hardware wallets, this is the attacker needs to have the value of the pin to make a transaction. So this is quite unlikely that an attacker would be able to monitor the power consumption of your device when you are able to make a transaction. But we also studied the scalar multiplication of Twizzle, and we proved that it was possible to retrieve the secret value of your Bitcoin key when it computes the public key from your private key. But this is not that important because if the attacker is able to monitor this power consumption, that means that he has already your pin value. So that was more for a scientific interest than real attacks.
Okay, I see. Another concept that I've heard of, and this may, I don't know, let me know if this is not a relevant kind of attack or way that can be done, but there's this concept of fuzz testing. And so as I understand, when you do fuzz testing, you're trying to, let's say you've got a certain field and you start inputting data that it's not meant to go into that field to see if you can get a different response out of the computer. Is there any sort of similar parallel here with hardware wallets and fuzz testing?
Yeah, definitely, because on hardware wallet there are interfaces, software interfaces. When you want to make a transaction, you will have to input your transaction to the device, and for USB and so on. There are some interfaces, not that much, because this is made for this hardware wallet, few interfaces for security. But as soon as there are interfaces, you have to ensure that the inputs are correctly used and there is no buffer overflow and so on. And this kind of properties can be checked using static analysis. This is a good point. It can be checked also by auditing the code, but it can be difficult to figure out in all the code if there is no buffer overflow, for instance. So to be more efficient and to have more confidence there is no buffer overflow, we implement fuzzing. And fuzzing, what you do is quite naive. You will use your computer to input a lot of different inputs, random inputs. You will guide the fuzzer in order that the random is a bit guided, that you won't test the same thing a lot of times. So you will guide the random in order to be more efficient. And the fuzzer will try to monitor behavior which are not planned by the designer. So as soon as you have a crash, it might be because there is a buffer overflow, but a small bug which can turn into a vulnerability. Because a vulnerability, basically this is a bug which can be exploited to do something, to do an attack. And the fuzzing process will help you to find a bug just randomly.
Right, I see, yeah. And I guess in terms of these attacks on Ledger devices, were Ledger devices sort of hardened against these kinds of attacks, or what's the thought there?
So what we do during the design process, we try to do the most static analysis possible. The Donjon is auditing the code day to day. We find some vulnerabilities, some enhancements, some lot of things that you can improve the security, and also we have an emulator in order to make fuzzing more efficiently, and we also do fuzzing. And also, we do hardware attacks to be sure that our implementation is secure against an attacker with a physical access to your device.
Got it. And from a code auditing point of view, are you looking there at things like making sure that, let's say, some cryptographic standard has been correctly implemented and that there hasn't been a mistake made in the random number generation? Is that the sort of thing that you're looking for when you're doing code audit?
Yeah, this is part of the audit, yes. This is the most important part of the audit, auditing the crypto library, being sure that it's not vulnerable to invalid curve attack, invalid point attack, that the randomness is correctly used, there is no bias, and all this kind of vulnerability which can be found in crypto library.
Fascinating. Okay. Can you talk us through a little bit around what does a responsible disclosure process look like? So you found the problem. Now you take that either to, if it's internal, you take that to your internal team or out to another hardware wallet team. And as I understand, there's obviously some interesting ethical questions around this because obviously there's a question of how quickly is the other party going to respond and try to patch that vulnerability, because in that time when it's not patched, all the users are vulnerable, right?
As I mentioned before, we come from an industry where vulnerabilities stay secret for all players. At Ledger and in the Bitcoin industry, there is this transparency policy, but it does not mean we have to directly become black hat or has hat. I mean, in the Donjon, we are a security researcher, and we are more interested by the science aspect of the thing, rather than the fame or the money. So, in my perspective, this industry suffers a lot from the fear of the security breaches. So, acting ethically is the least we can do. So, for the vulnerability we found, we reported them directly to the vendor and asked them if they were okay that we disclose them publicly at some point. In most of the cases, we agreed with them on the time frame and so on. In a few cases, the vendor did not want us to disclose, and we decided not to disclose simply. And for instance, if we are talking about the worst, I would say, vulnerability we found on Trezor, which is the seed extraction technique. Basically, what we were able is to, if you have physical access to Trezor 1 or Trezor T or KeepKey device, we figure out an attack which allows an attacker to extract the seed value from the circuit. The thing is, this vulnerability cannot be patched. There is no way to fix it, and that means that any firmware upgrade won't allow to patch the vulnerability. So what we decided to do is to disclose it to the vendor in order to they figure out something to mitigate the vulnerability. But as the vulnerability is not fixable, we decided to not publish how we do. So in this case, I think this is the most responsible way to disclose this vulnerability. In this case, users are aware of the attack, so they can choose a way to mitigate it. But real attackers on the field won't be able to use it for bad things, I would say. So it avoids exploitation while it makes the users aware of the vulnerability. But Yes, responsible disclosure are very important. We want to make sure that the user of the ecosystem stays safe.
Got it. I'm also curious, as you came from the more of the secure element world, and as I understand, in say banking, they have HSM, hardware security modules. How does the current state of Bitcoin and Bitcoin hardware wallets compare against, say, banking HSM? Do you have a sense of that?
It's difficult to compare hardware wallet to HSM. This is the different things. HSM is more a basic block for building more complex application, while an HSM is already hardware wallet is already an application. This is very precise, but. You are talking about HSM in the past months as we use HSM and for the Ledger Vault, for instance, but also for our Nano S and X in order to be sure they are genuine. There is mutual authentication with an HSM. So we studied precisely how HSM works, and we did a lot of reverse engineering in order to understand everything, a lot of fuzzing. And in this very case, we found a few vulnerabilities which are quite critical, and we worked tightly with the vendors to help them to patch the vulnerability. This process lasts maybe 1 year. We found them last year, I guess. And we worked with them in a long process, and when everything has been patched, I think it was the case in the end of 2018. We agreed with them to publish, and they decided they did not want to be mentioned, so we decided to publish anonymously the vulnerability we found, and we hope that will increase the knowledge of HSM study, security study, and improve the security of the HSM ecosystem. And we published them at STIC, which is a French security conference, and at Black Hat a few days ago.
Wow. Okay. Great. I'm also really interested to ask you around. So obviously you work for Ledger, so I appreciate that. But what I'm trying to get at here is the question of, what are your thoughts on using specific hardware devices that, let's say, an outsider, if they see it and they know you're using that device, then they know it's probably got Bitcoin on it, compared to this idea of using non-specific hardware? And so one example, if you know Trace Mayer, he talks about this idea of using the Purism laptop and the Glacier protocol. How do you compare those different methods, and what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I know the arguments on non-specific hardware, which would be air-gapped and so on. First of all, it does not solve the physical access problem. If you use a standard laptop, I mean, if the attacker has a physical access, you lose your farm. So also implementing your own wallet with a laptop is not an easy task. I mean, there are a lot of companies on the market which spend significant time and money and effort to do hardware wallet or wallet. And as you can see, it's not easy. So if you want to build your own hardware, your own wallet, I would say, you will have some difficulties to make it well. Nevertheless, I think it's a good idea to implement your own wallet because it will help you to understand Bitcoin and how it works and so on. I think it's a good idea, but I wouldn't recommend a non-very advanced user to do that because there are plenty of mistakes that you can do in the process.
Yeah, I see. And so I guess that also ties into the next question around future directions with hardware wallets. What's your thoughts on what they will look like, and what sort of hardware would they use?
It's difficult to predict the future, and at Ledger it's not exactly my scope. This is more the mission of our CTO Nicolas Bacca that you probably know. Nevertheless, we want to be part of the mass adoption. This is part of our mission at Ledger. According to me, the mass adoption will only be possible if the user experience is as smooth as possible. For instance, we would like to enable payments in Bitcoin with a user experience similar to contactless banking cards. I mean, this is the kind of thing we would like to do. The other big challenge is the security, of course, and we'll have to constantly raise the bar for security. We can't lose this cat and mouse game.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. In terms of, sorry, there was one other question I was keen to ask about, and this is around verification of change addresses and the other multi-signature devices in that set. So let's start with the change address one. So it's my understanding that with some of the Ledger devices, potentially in the past, or potentially even now, I'm not sure, there was a difficulty for the user to make sure, yes, my device holds the private key for this change address. Can you speak to that?
I think you are referring to multisig setup, right?
Yes, I think it's in the case of a multi-signature setup.
So about multisig, first of all, I'd like to say that I love cryptography. I'm fond of the schemes. But multisig is a wide field. There are secure MPC with the recent threshold signatures paper and the older one like Schnorr signature that we will have in Bitcoin soon, I hope so. But here, I think you're more talking about the script-based multisig used in Ethereum or most likely PSBT for Bitcoin. Just a word about security. I heard this trend saying that multisig is the ultimate solution to all of our problems. In particular, I heard Michael, with who you discussed recently. Multisignature schemes need to be reviewed by scientific community, and their implementation is also of concern. This is the first thing I would like to say. The main problem is that a tiny mistake that can lead to massive loss and at scale, and this is very concerning to me. And when I saw some companies who are basing all their security on a brand new MPC scientific article, which has not even been reviewed by the scientific community, I think it's a bit irresponsible. And I don't even talk about implementation issues. There are already examples of loss in Ethereum and others. But talking more precisely about PSBT on hardware wallet setup, which was your initial question, if I understood correctly. Again, I think multi-signature adds complexity, and complexity is the enemy of security. So if you really want to use multi-signature using hardware wallet, you have to be aware of what you do and what are the threats. It's not the magic thing that Michael was talking about from my perspective. So talking about our implementation, we are currently working on a full redesign of the Bitcoin app, and we'd like to include additional validation based on descriptors and pre-validated templates. And I think it will improve the UX and the security as well. But waiting this, I'd like to give some recommendation for the advanced user who would like to use multisig setup with PSBT and their Nano devices. First of all, the multi-signature addresses must be validated using an external channel. The main problem is that there is no straightforward way to validate the public keys that you're combining are legitimate, because they are not in your wallet. So it's already a problem. So validating the addresses must be done on using an external channel, another channel, basically. We also recommend to validate the change addresses through an external channel. The change question is not simple because it depends on template, and only validating the addresses on the device is not sufficient. It can work only if all parties comply with the BIP 45 and all the standards, which is not sure, basically. I want to get into all these details too. I don't want to lose our people hearing us. But what I want to highlight here is that the security of PSBT multisig scheme is not straightforward, and I won't recommend you to use it if you don't know exactly what you are doing. And in all case, I suggest to start using it on testnet and try experiment and understand everything. that would be my advices about multisig and PSBT setup.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think, I guess while we've spoken about some of the ways in which hardware wallets can get hacked and so on, do you have any advice for the listeners out there? Let's say they're an individual, they're using maybe a single signature, single hardware wallet scenario. What are some tips and things that they should keep in their mind?
Yeah, sure. Let me recall the basic security advices because looking at our customer support, I would say that they are not well understood by everyone. The first one will be to operate your wallet in a secure environment, especially when you are generating your own seed. Don't do that on the street. Do that at home in a quiet place. Take your time and so on. It's very important. Very important. Don't forget to back up your seed. We have too much customers who lost their funds because of this, and this is a very dumb mistake. And back up your seed securely. Don't take a picture of it. Don't save it online on your online computer. Don't send it to you by email. It happens so much time. So that there are too much stories of people losing their seed just because of this. And the last very simple advice is trust only the display of your nano. Don't trust what is written on your computer because your computer is probably malwared. You can also use your passphrase for plausible deniability, for instance. But if you do that, don't lose it. That was the very basics, but I think it's important to recall them.
No, I think that's a totally great reminders for my listeners. How about, do you have any advice for, let's say, people who are operating in maybe they're more of a family scenario, or maybe they're an institution? Do you have any suggestions on security tips for them?
Okay, families and institutions are not exactly the same, but for institutional storage, I think the best option on the market so far is the Ledger Vault. I will do some advertising, sorry for this. But Ledger Vault is a very interesting solution from a technical perspective. This is what interests me, but also in the case of institutional storage, it allows the organization to manage their funds according to their requirements. The Ledger Vault brings a very high level of security. The security of the funds relies on two main pillars. From one side, the hardware security module, which we audited extensively, and from the other side, on the personal security device, the PSD. It allows the customers to define sets of rules and quorum for managing the funds. For instance, there is administrators, and they can decide that for a specific quorum, this quorum can only make a transaction of an amount of X Bitcoin during a specific period. And if they want to do that, they will have to make 3 signatures out of 5 using the PSD. But what is flexible is that they can decide exactly what are their requirements, what is their governance, basically. It's very flexible and while being very secure, since it relies on secure hardware, the PSD and the HSM, but also on cryptography. There is a lot of cryptography between the PSD and the hardware security module, and that's it basically. And if you are an advanced user and you have a lot of coins, you can have a look to a multisig setup, but again, I won't recommend simple user. If you're not an advanced user, I don't recommend you to go to this setup.
Got it. I see. With the Vault, actually, I don't know a huge amount about it. I had a quick look on the website. So I understand. Then you were mentioning the PSD devices. But that's not like multi-signature though, right? That, like, it's more like they're calling back to the Vault, which is being run out of, is it a web interface for that? Or what is that?
So it's more a multi-authorization setup than a multisig. We don't do a multisig on-chain using the PSD. What we do is a governance layer which allows a multi-authorization using the PSD. Each PSD has a secret key and so on, and the HSM layer will verify that we indeed have 3 out of 5 people validating this transaction. What is very interesting in this setup is that you can use the multi-authorization disregarding the cryptocurrency you use. You don't have to have a script or to have a Schnorr signature. It will work on Bitcoin exactly the same way as it will work on Ethereum and Monero and whatever cryptocurrency you will have.
Right, I see. Yeah, so it's not using multi-signature. It's more like the authentication into Ledger's vault, and then the vault is the one that's enforcing the policy in terms of 3 out of 5 quorum or whatever the quorum that you set, right?
Exactly. You can see it as a multi-sig setup because when you're talking about authentication, there is a signature provided by each PSD. But at the end, this is not on-chain multi-signature. This is the main difference, yes.
Yeah. And so those PSDs, are they internet connected, or are they sort of like a hardware wallet, but they're just a specific device for the purpose only of this Ledger Vault?
They are based on the Ledger Blue hardware wallet. So this is the same platform, but this is very specialized for Vault application. You cannot install the Bitcoin app, for instance. You just have one app, which is the Ledger Vault app, and this is a Ledger Blue, basically. Yes.
Got it. Okay, great. Well, thanks for that information. I guess lastly, where can the listeners find you, and where can they find Donjon Ledger?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. You have just to search for Charles Guillemet. Or you can follow the Donjon. Our Twitter handle is Donjon Ledger. And we have also a blog, which is ledger-donjon.github.io.
Fantastic. I'll include the links in the show notes for the listeners. But that was a really great discussion. Thank you very much for joining me, Charles.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me today. Bye-bye.
I hope you found that educational and that you're now a little more equipped in terms of knowledge about Bitcoin hardware wallet security. So think about what steps you need to take to improve your own security and just beware of some of the common mistakes. So make sure you back up your seed. Ensure you do not take digital copies of that seed, and be careful what environment you initialize and use the hardware wallet in. And so now you can advise your newbie Bitcoiner friends, or better yet, share this episode with your friends so they can learn too. Just a reminder, show notes, episode transcript, and podcast subscription links are on my website, Stephan Livera. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys in the Citadels.